Right, thank you, Naomi. I guess we have to add because things have changed, right? So our panelists, welcome, will not wear their masks, but we request that you do. And we probably won't linger afterwards, as we often do, but we'll ask you to exit the building and not linger after the presentation. I'm Peter Field, that's who's talking to you. I serve the University of Canterbury as the head of humanities and creative arts. And that includes our campus down here where we have classics and our museum and performance music. And so I get the pleasure of going between the two campuses frequently. And that's kind of our theme for what we've done this year. And this is our concluding presentation in our evening with. It's sort of the relationship of the university and the town and gown, if you will. And I think it is our conviction, it is our conviction, absolutely, as I hope will bear out tonight, that whatever it is we do, and we do a lot in our library, right, in our laboratories, in our lecture halls, we have colleagues here, if it doesn't have value, if it doesn't translate onto Hereford Street, into the Art Center, into the city, then it's just not worth much. And we'd like to think that what we do is worth a great deal. So knowledge is engagement, is our various ideas. So very quickly, welcome the three of you and our panelists today. I will briefly introduce my colleague, and then I guess you'll introduce Beth. And Simon, I guess, needs no introduction. We'll see how that goes. But this is Catherine Moran. A graduate of the University of Western Ontario, and then made her way to the University of Canterbury, where she earned her PhD, and then worked her way to my colleague, Professor Catherine Moran, professor in language and speech therapy, and also our DVC, Vice Chancellor. You know what the D stands for, de facto Vice Chancellor. So welcome, and I leave it to you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Kia ora, Peter. Kia ora, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's especially a pleasure to be here with Beth Beamish, who I will give a fuller, more proper introduction to, and Simon Kingham, my colleague at the University of Canterbury, again, Professor Simon Kingham at the University of Canterbury, who's joining me in the conversation with Beth tonight. I'll just, before I introduce myself a little more and Beth, I'd like to understand a little bit about you. So just out of, I'm delighted that you're here to hear about, have our conversation about dyslexia, but I'm interested what your relationship, why you're here at the talk. So do any of you have a child with dyslexia or a grandchild? Yeah. So we have some people who understand that from a personal, familial. People who are just here out of interest and want to know more about it. Yes. People who are studying in the area or maybe in a profession, teaching, who might have a relationship with that. Anybody I missed that you'd like to tell?
Family member, not child or grandchild.
Family member, not child or grandchild. Anybody else?
To find out more specifically so I can use it in the classroom.
Wonderful. So we have, it's a great diverse group of people here for different reasons. I had as a speech language therapist, as Peter mentioned, I had the opportunity when I worked clinically to work with children from young up to adolescence and high school, who I saw struggled with various and assorted learning difficulties. And many of those learning difficulties stemmed from dyslexia and language difficulties. That prompted me to do my research in dyslexia, but also in areas associated with dyslexia that are somewhat lesser known, because there are many more impacts that occur around dyslexia. So I spent my time as a PhD student, and beyond that, as I worked at the University of Canterbury, researching the area of dyslexia and language learning disorders and memory and some of the associated disorders. But what Beth has done is she's taken the research off the page and she has put it into a personal perspective. She has taken the research and brought it together and brought it to real life. So it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Beth Beamish. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Beth before I open to her. Beth Beamish was in her 40s trying to help her dyslexic son Harry learn to read and spell when she recognized dyslexia was behind many of her own embarrassing mistakes. Driven by a desire to understand the condition, Beth read everything about dyslexia she could lay her hands on and went to lectures and presentations. The information she gathered over 7 years became her book, Dyslexia, Wrestling with an Octopus, 10 Tips to Help Your Child. And that gives me a bit of a shiver because it is very much an octopus, and really what we're all aiming to do is to help, whether it's somebody we know or whether it's people in the classroom we're working with. Beth likens dyslexia to an octopus. Its tentacles are the potential areas of difficulty: reading, listening, spelling, writing, memory, motor control, spatial awareness, and the frequently overlooked health and social challenges. As well as giving tips to teach reading and spelling, she covers heavy topics, often unseen, such as depression, anxiety, and bullying. But her tone is always upbeat, and her approach is that of a parent talking to another parent at a school gate. Her information and tips are practical, and she uses humor and real-life examples whenever possible. Beth also regularly blogs about dyslexia at dyslexiaoctopus.com. It is my pleasure to introduce Beth Beamish. We're going to have this is very much a conversation, and I've been looking forward to it, Beth, looking forward to being able to ask some questions, and I promise I will let Simon get a word in, even though I've got loads of questions and loads of information I want to know about. Beth, when you were at school, you weren't aware that you had dyslexia.
No.
Can you remember what that was like, or what learning was like?
Well, really, it was when I was writing the book, a lot of it came back to me, because you just assume that that's normal, that's what everybody's like. And it was when I was writing the book, it was like, yeah, that was me. There was a lot of aha moments, really. So I can remember quite vividly sitting in the classroom with an alphabet frieze all around the wall and thinking, how does anybody ever remember all those letters, you know? That LMNOP kind of bit in the middle that I always got stuck on. I can remember really struggling to learn my times tables. And again, you just think, oh, well, maybe that's what everybody struggles, but especially the 7 and 8 times table, oh my goodness, that was a challenge. And I can vividly remember being in a maths class where the teacher would make you change seat depending on your test result. So you would constantly be at the bottom of the class. That was great for the self-esteem. So yeah, I can remember just that whole anxiety around tests, especially time tests. But I didn't know that that wasn't normal. And my brother actually had more severe dyslexia than I had. And his was never picked up either. I mean, I was fortunate that for me, my main problem was spelling. I could read. I now know I'm quite a slow reader, but you know, I never had problems reading. But my brother had problems with reading and spelling. And he actually left school without any qualifications whatsoever. Whereas I just really was such a nerd and worked incredibly hard and left school with a lot of qualifications. But it was very, very hard for me, very hard.
So Beth, I guess one thing that is kind of surprising in a way, given the dyslexia and, as you said, the LMNOP and the letters, but you've become a writer. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended there and how you ended up there in your career?
Yeah, because when I was at school, I loved art. That was my passion. And I loved English. I loved reading. But not being able to spell, and this was in the days before spell check, you know, so that was a real handicap. I remember getting 50 out of 50 for one of my stories, and this was because my English teacher never marked me down for spelling. But then my sister read the story and she went, oh, look at all the spelling mistakes in this. But you know, I actually love creative writing, but I knew to take, I got an A in my A-level English, for example, but I knew to take it further and go to university and do English, I'd really struggle with spelling. So I went down the art route instead. And yeah, it was great for me. I did graphic design, that was my degree. But graphic design was a challenge in a way because I think things are changing, but certainly back then, if you couldn't spell, it was because you're stupid. There was that sort of perception that it was an intelligence issue. So you certainly wanted to hide it as much as possible. And I did occasionally make spelling mistakes on my graphic design. I can remember at college doing a poster, beautiful hand-lettered poster, you had to hand-letter it in those days, for a Mozart opera, and I'd done this huge, and then I put a spelling mistake on the poster, you know, it's just stuff like that. And in my book I actually mention a graphic designer who deliberately, she became an artist, deliberately put spelling mistakes into her artwork. And I just thought, oh, you know, I didn't have that confidence. Yeah, not at all.
That's quite clever, really.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, talking about your childhood, your start, and your early career, then what brought you here to New Zealand?
Well, we came to New Zealand when my husband got a job at the university, actually, and it was a really good move for us because at the time when we came out in 2000, we were trying for a family. We didn't know that it wasn't going to happen for us, but we ended up actually adopting 2 children in New Zealand. That wouldn't have happened if we'd stayed in the UK, so it was definitely meant to be.
And with your children, you found, you have a girl and a boy, and you noticed that your son was very different from your daughter.
Yeah.
So at what stage did you start to recognize that there was dyslexia and that he had dyslexia?
Well, it was having the 2 children who are completely different, and that can happen with, you know, biological children as much, you know, and then a boy and a girl, you know, you can't really compare them, all that sort of stuff. But certainly with our daughter, you know, we did the reading every day to them, stick on letters on the bath, all that kind of thing. And for her, just picking up reading was just like picking up walking. You know, I don't remember actually teaching her to read. You know, she just knew all her letters, and then she went to school and she brought books home, and then she was reading, and it just happened. And we did exactly the same thing for our son, and it just didn't happen. And it was really interesting. We could just tell there was something going on when we would go, okay, so this is k-a-t. What could that be? K-a-t. And he'd go, truck, house. There was no connection between the sounds and the words, so we could tell there was something going on there for him. And yeah, I guess when he got to school, he just didn't pick it up. He went to reading recovery. That didn't help either. And he didn't pick up, he couldn't recognise his name, he couldn't write his name. And once he started writing, letters were usually backwards. I remember going to the beach once, and he just started to be able to write his name, and he wrote his name, and he was so pleased with it. The whole thing was completely backwards. So yeah, that was the sort of things that we were seeing. Yeah.
Can I ask a question here? I mean, how did the teachers work with this? Because I had a dyslexia. My kids
Yeah,
had dyslexia.
They didn't mention dyslexia. My son's 16 now, so this isn't that long ago. But I do know that it is quite common for young children to have letter reversal issues. So you do have to be careful not to jump straight to dyslexia. There could be other things going on. They do say really you shouldn't diagnose dyslexia till child's 7. But having said that, there's a lot of research out there that shows it's pretty obvious by the time the child's 5 whether they've got these issues. So yeah, we felt reading recovery for him was a bit like having a deaf person and someone shouting at them. You know, it wasn't actually offering a different way. It was basically doing the same stuff, and that wasn't working for him. So it was quite frustrating for us.
So you logged some of the journey and some of what you observed, and you mentioned that forms the basis of some of your book. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I guess.
What made you think to do that?
What made me think to do it was our son is adopted, and his birth parents were very young. That's why he was placed for adoption. And I really felt that they could well go on and have other children who had these issues. So they weren't together, but not knowing which side of the family it was coming from, or whether, actually I think it's coming from both sides of the family. So I just thought I would log what we were doing, what worked for him, and then I found, because I'm the sort of person who likes to research and find out things, other people were saying, oh, tell me about that, and other people were interested. And dyslexia being remarkably common, there's dyslexic children in every class. So I would sort of gravitate towards the parents whose kids have dyslexia and talk about what I'd found helpful. And it just made me realise that there was this disconnect, really, that there's a lot of great research out there about dyslexia, but it's not necessarily filtering through into everyday practice in school. So that's when I thought maybe I could make this into a book. But it did take me 7 years. It took me 7 years to pull it together. But I guess that, as I say, Harry's now 16, so I have been able to give the experience of primary school and secondary school.
So obviously, in the book there are lots of your personal observations. You also cite a lot of research. So you've done them both, lived it and researched it. What surprised you really about? Did anything surprise you, or did it seem like, oh yeah, this all seems very familiar? And
I just assumed, like everybody else, probably, well, the general public, that dyslexia was about reading and spelling. And it was once I started doing the research that I had all these light bulb moments of, oh, that's why I'm like that. Oh, look, that's why I'm like that. Oh, that's what, there was so much more than just the reading and the spelling. So I think there's sort of two big areas for me, which is why I did the octopus tentacles, the fact that there's lots of challenges as well. It's not one tentacle's reading and one tentacle's spelling, but then you've also got these memory issues and health challenges and social issues and things like that. So there's a lot of things going on. So I was amazed with the health conditions, and for me that just was like a huge light bulb going off, because I've been dogged with certain health issues that I never connected to my dyslexia. The fact that I had eczema as a child, my brother had appalling psoriasis. Never did I think that was connected to dyslexia. My other two siblings who aren't dyslexic never had skin issues at all. So the fact that there is that link with skin conditions, because they say there's a couple of chromosomes that are involved with dyslexia. One of them is chromosome 6, and it's the same chromosome that has genes for allergies and asthma. So there's a real connection there with skin problems and asthma. Another thing I remember vividly, lying on a hot water bottle in bed when I was a kid, always having ear infections. And again, I just thought, that's just me, I just had a lot of ear infections. But then when Harry came along, every tooth that he cut, he had a terrible ear infection. And just seeing that actually, that's because people with dyslexia often have a smaller eustachian tube in their ear. See, I can't equalise pressure when I'm in an aeroplane, or even going over that Tarpica hill. That's really just because my tube in my ear is actually smaller, which means it blocks more frequently, especially when you see that a child's tube is very small because they haven't quite grown, so it can block. And Dr. Lindsay Pear's done a lot of research on glue ear and the links with glue ear and dyslexia, which I found really, really interesting. Then there was the link with gluten intolerance and celiac disease, which I'd never really put two and two together. I've struggled with my health pretty much, all my life actually, and a lot of it's been to do with autoimmune conditions. and it's this autoimmune connection with dyslexia that I found really interesting. And when Harry was born, he was very colicky, a lot of reflux, and it took us 2 years of going to lots of different doctors to actually realise that he was celiac. And there's a higher incidence of celiac disease for people with dyslexia. But also, there's a higher incidence of gluten intolerance as well, and that's what I've got, gluten intolerance. So that was an interesting link, which I would never have made. And then also, for boys with dyslexia, the research shows that often they can't metabolize fatty acid. So there's a problem with metabolizing fatty acid, and your brain actually needs fatty acid for the neurons. So just by giving them brain formulation fish oil, you can actually improve their reading. And that's certainly worked for Harry. And also we found with this fish oil for Harry, it really made a big difference to his focus and attention as well. So he just had that deficit of his fatty acids. So that was the sort of health thing. The other surprise for me was that as a kid in school, I really struggled. I had friends, I had a couple of close friends, but I struggled in group dynamics. I really struggled to, like, I was the first aid monitor in primary school. I didn't have to go in the playground, you know? I could just give people a plaster or wipe their knees with a bit of Dettol. I used to have a little kidney dish and I could just wipe their knees. But I actually really found that whole playground dynamic very difficult. And Harry's been the same, actually. Now, that's not to say every dyslexic child will struggle with that, but for a lot of people with dyslexia, certainly as a child, you're about 2 years behind emotionally. So, you know, you get to an adult and you catch up, it's not a big deal. But as a child, 2 years gap is huge when you're in a classroom situation. So, you know, you're constantly just out of step with your peers. And we've noticed it at high school, it's really been a big challenge because Harry's just not in the same emotional space as these other 16-year-olds. And it is a real challenge. So that was a big surprise for me. And that puts them at risk for bullying. Bullying's a huge issue. And I also make a point in the book that actually it puts children at risk for sexual predators because they just haven't got the social awareness that other children have. And social predators target kids who've got learning difficulties.
Yeah, it is surprising to hear that, to think about the other bits, because the most common thing we think about usually with dyslexia is the reading. And certainly the reading was an issue for Harry. And do you want to tell us a little bit about how did you address that? How did you work with that?
The reading was really difficult for him. As I say, he went through reading recovery and got nothing out of it at all. And that's not to knock the teacher. She was definitely doing the program as it was meant to be done, but he just got nowhere with that. So we found the first place to start really for him was to address this fact that he couldn't hear the vowels in particular. He couldn't hear, nothing wrong with his hearing. You know, he had passed every hearing test, but there was just this auditory processing issue that was quite a challenge for him. So we had a speech therapist working with him when he was probably about 5, 6, I think it would have been. And she would do things like having letter tiles on the floor, and she would talk about them, and he would jump onto the. It was quite interactive.
Yes.
That's how she did it, to train his ear to actually be able to hear the sounds. So I think fundamentally that was important, to actually be able to hear the sounds. You can understand that if you can't connect the sounds to the words, it's very difficult to actually be able to read. So that was the first thing that we did. Then he did have a tutor, but also I did quite a bit of research around reading, and there was a lot of talk about Orton Gillingham. That was Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham, who actually, it's quite an old program and system that's been around for a long time, but they really felt that for people with dyslexia, you actually have to structure a program where they get taught all the letter blends, and there's no gaps, there's no guessing, there's no look at the word and just have a guess at what it, look at the picture, see if you can guess what the, you know, it's actually very structured, multi-sensory program. So I sent off to the States, the one that I used, and I'm happy to chat to anybody afterwards, was all about spelling and all about reading. And I knew that after school, Harry was trash. He was shattered because being at school is so draining for a child who really is this square peg in a round hole. So we just got up earlier and we did half an hour every morning on the spelling or the reading, and that's how we got it cracked really. And this is a multi-sensory program where it's all done with letter tiles on a board, and it was fantastic. So that made a huge difference to him. But we did keep up with the tutoring as well throughout. We had these, with All About Reading, you have books that are particular for people with dyslexia. You basically learn certain words and then the stories are based around those certain words. So it's quite a good program in that respect.
Did he like reading?
No.
Did he ever get to like reading?
No. No, and I think I'd love to say he loves reading, but no, I did find things like mountain bike magazines. He loves mountain biking. So I would buy him mountain bike magazines or get books that would be of interest to him. It's kind of understandable if you don't like doing something, you don't want to read a book about something that's not particularly interesting. So we're just trying to find the right topic of book. And mountain biking, definitely. I mean, there were times where I'd get him a new mountain bike magazine and he'd go, "Can I just read for half an hour more, Mum?" And I thought, well, I'm not going to say no. You know, got to this point where he could actually read. Yeah.
Fantastic. And of course, related to reading is the writing, the spelling, the writing. Was that an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And biggest thing we did was I just feel standard spelling tests in school do not work for people with dyslexia. The way that All About Spelling approaches it is you learn certain letter blends and then you'll learn the words around those, and it's very much a group of words that are similar. So you might learn the EA letter blend and you learn words around that. But just to have a standard list of spellings is absolutely hopeless, because basically it takes a child with dyslexia hundreds and hundreds of words repeated to actually be able to remember it. The memory is a huge issue, and the lady who devised this program talks about this funnel. You basically have this funnel for your memory, and you can only put a couple of concepts through at a time. And I think often with school, there's so much that's got to go through this funnel, and it just blocks. You know, there's just no way. So it's just this targeted approach of trying to learn, right, we'll learn this first and then this, and lots of repetition. Every time you come to it, you go back over what you did yesterday or what you did last week, constantly reminding people, you know, the child of what's been done. That was the way we did it. And he can spell now and he can read now. So it did work, but certainly there was a lot of work that went into that.
So what do you do with the school? Does the school still do those fundraisers when you have to learn all the words?
Yeah, we just opted out.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
they're not good, are they?
So there was a spellathon at school,
Yeah.
and I just thought, yep, here's my $20. I'm not even going to go there. So yeah, things like that. Just opted out. And I think what I would say to any parent is, you just have to be your child's advocate. That's one of my big points, really. That you think, oh, I'm going to be that squeaky wheel parent, that awkward. Yeah, I'm sorry, you are going to be, because your child is in this class of 30 other kids, and you know, they're just going to drown in that class unless you are going to be the advocate for them, because it's not set up for children with dyslexia. It's just the way it is.
And of course, there are more than the 2 tentacles of reading and writing, or 3 if we had spelling. So what were there, with Harry, were there other issues? Did you see those other less known issues?
Absolutely. And in my book, I talk about the fact that dyslexia, I sort of liken it to an ice cream. This is, I've got a friend of mine who's an illustrator. She did some great illustrations for the book. So I talk about going to this ice cream shop with a friend who looked at like 30 different flavours of ice cream, and then he picked the vanilla. And I was just like, why would you do that? But you know, for a dyslexic person, there's always other things going on. There's never just the issue with the reading and spelling. So I've talked about in the book dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, possibly autism, non-verbal processing, auditory processing disorder. So there's always issues that overlap, and that's because on the chromosomes, you know, again, it's all the same chromosomes. There's a huge amount of overlap on these chromosomes, so there'll be other challenges along there. And for Harry, his biggest challenge was ADD, and that's really what we saw when he was a baby and a child, because he was running at 9 months. He was actually running around at 9 months. He was just full on right from the word go. And that whole inability to focus, coupled with dyslexia, has been a real challenge. Basically, it's painful for him to have to focus on boring stuff. And boring stuff is homework. Boring stuff is basically anything that he's not particularly interested in. So schoolwork is just really boring. And that's very hard. We were told when he was 5 that we should put him on stimulant medication, but he genetically is very thin, very, very thin. He's from a family of whippets, basically. They're very and we were just really worried about the appetite suppressant nature of stimulant medication. So we went down the route of multi-nutrient supplements. And Professor Julia Ruckledge at the university actually did a trial on multi-nutrient supplements. So that's worked really well for him. And he's been on that since he was 7. Yeah.
Wow.
With the fish oil as well.
So what was school like for him then? If, you know, you've mentioned the range of issues, and then the ADD.
Primary school was difficult. I think for him, the whole time, the social stuff has been, a lot of kids go to school to be with their friends, and if you actually don't have friends, it's really hard to go to school. So the social stuff has been very hard for him. The work at school has been very hard. He's never done much homework, and I've actually really encouraged that. I actually think it's hard enough to get through a school day without bringing it home and doing homework. So we've never really gone for homework. If he's had to do a certain amount of homework, I've always spoken to the teacher and I said, right, this is how much we'll do, you know, and just made sure that it was manageable. Because what would take another child 15 minutes would take him 2 hours. So it's just about managing that, really. So primary school, he's very sporty, and I guess that was fortunate, because obviously not everybody's sporty, but he enjoyed sport and enjoyed football. So at lunchtime he could play football. And then high school, I think he's very musical. So being in the band and being able to play music was really good for him. But I would say high school's been more difficult, because I think the social dynamics in high school just go up to another level, really. It's just taken it one more notch. And his happy place is out mountain biking, and there's not the same competition there. I think everyone can just enjoy mountain biking. So he has groups of boys he mountain bikes with very happily, and they're from different schools all over the town. But in the school setting, he does find it quite difficult to navigate those playground dynamics, and that's always been a wee bit of a challenge.
And is he getting support? Is there learning support at school?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, he has extra time for tests, and he can use a reader writer. But interestingly enough, with NCEA, he's just finished his NCEA level 1, and he does this. He just came up to me and said, "I'm not doing any exams, Mum." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. How's that going to work?" He said, "Well, I've passed all my credits." So there is a lot of internal assessment.
Yes.
So he actually didn't need to do the exams at the end of the year. Fair enough. You know, we've got there.
And was that better for him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
What does he aspire to do? What does he want to do when he at this age? They sort of
Well, I think I mentioned in the
start
book.
thinking about.
Yeah, I do mention in the book good careers for people with dyslexia, and it's things like music, arts, interestingly enough, there's quite a few dyslexic architects because that's sort of spatial aspects of dyslexia. People are often very good at seeing things in 3D. But for Harry, I would say music is his passion. He plays the guitar and he plays the saxophone. Absolutely loves it. So there could be something in the music field. He's actually very visual though. He's very good at art. He's going to be doing graphics next year and he's quite interested in fashion as well. So it'll be something along the arts, music.
And it's interesting because you chose graphics
Yep.
as your first career.
Yeah.
Have there been other things that have helped Harry along the way with his dyslexia? There's some
Yeah.
key things you would point out.
Yeah, I would say self-esteem is the big thing. To actually try and keep your child's self-esteem is, for me, just school is just really tough. I actually feel like I'm throwing him into a war zone every day. You know, it's that sort of sense of going over the top in the trenches. So it is tough. It's really tough to go there every day when you really don't like it. So it's finding things that he does enjoy and really investing in them and encouraging those strengths. It's finding your child's strength, I think, and then really focusing on that. So for Harry, mountain biking, it's been really good actually because there's a big link between addiction and dyslexia as well. And a lot of that's to do with a dopamine hit, you know, so finding healthy ways to get that dopamine hit, and mountain biking really does that for him. So that's been, although it's an expensive sport, I'm happy to encourage him in that. Yeah, so far we haven't had any major accidents. But
So you said earlier when you were at school, because you were dyslexic, you felt people thought you weren't very clever.
it was really
Or-
interesting. I can remember my mum, who was a primary school teacher, she didn't realise that my brother or I had dyslexia, but she went along to the meet the teacher thing when I was in school, and the teacher said, well, of course, Beth's one of the top students in the class. My mum was like, what? She's such a dreamer, you know, she's such a, really? You know, she couldn't believe it, that actually I was doing very well. So yeah, it was interesting that there is still this sort of assumption that, especially if you can't spell, you're not very intelligent.
And does Harry get that too? Does he what does he think?
Self-esteem has definitely been
Mm.
the thing for him. He's actually just got the English prize this year, unbelievably. But it's in he's in the second stream, he's in 102, not 101, but he's the top of the class, 102. And I'm like, yay, you can get a prize, yay. And I always say, oh no, it's just 102, there's nothing. You know, but actually, that's fantastic that he's been given this prize. And I think it is just, yeah, for him, I think he's just kind of written off any thought of being academic. So it is a challenge. Yeah. Although with his art and his music, he gets merits and excellences for that.
Yes.
And you can actually have a bit of pride, I think, in that kind of work. Yeah.
And does he have a sense of belonging? Do you feel like he's getting there? He's accepting.
I think the mountain biking has given him that sense of belonging. I think it's really important to have that tribe and that sense of belonging somewhere. And I think the mountain biking's been that for him. And also being in a little group of musicians. He actually did his first year of high school at Hagley, which has an amazing music department. And because it's a smaller school, any kid who can play an instrument is in the band. And they had a big band, and he was in that. And they went round and played all around New Zealand, and that was really good for his confidence. Yeah, really.
So really finding what
Yeah.
works and what is great. So Beth, your book. So we've heard about Harry. We've heard about your challenges, Harry's challenges, and what you faced as a mum with Harry's challenges. So can you tell us a bit more about your book?
Sure. So Yeah, I do cover sort of Harry's journey and a wee bit about mine, but then I've broken it down into sort of 8 chapters to kind of go with my octopus theme. How to spot dyslexia, the learning challenges that often come with dyslexia, those health challenges I talk about, social effects of dyslexia, the importance of finding the strengths and competencies, and then nurturing the talents that come with dyslexia. And I think that's made a huge difference for Harry, just to keep his self-esteem by nurturing the talents that he does have. It's not about focusing on what you can't do, it's about focusing on what you're really good at and just staying with that. And then I've talked about a study by the Frostig Centre, and they looked at people with learning challenges over 25 years, did a very big survey and looked at what actually made the difference between people who succeeded and people who didn't succeed. I found that really interesting, and that was things like mentoring and being able to set goals and being taught how to work towards things, and words like yet, I can't do it yet. It's like, it's not that I can't do it, it's not that I can't read, it's just I can't read yet. So actually being able to reframe things is really important.
So you were obviously a mentor for Harry, and in some ways the book is that provides that. So Harry was very lucky. He had a mom who was absolutely committed to this and had some self-recognition of it, and wanted to be able to, and you read and you found out what you had to do. And so is the book partly bringing some of that together so it can be a sort of guide for parents to be the mentor or others?
Well, I've written it as this conversation at the school gate. I sort of addressed the book to Diane, and I sort of say at the beginning that Diane's a sort of acronym for dyslexic, aware, interested, needing more evidence or something. So I'm talking to a person throughout the book about what's worked for us, but also mentioning other things. I've mentioned other books, I've mentioned other websites. I've just got a couple of books here that I mentioned quite a bit, like for the ADD. I found this Healing ADD by Dr. Armin fascinating, because he talks about the 7 types of ADD, and that really helped me understand what Harry had, because he has a type of ADD that looks a lot like depression, and often is misdiagnosed as depression. So that was really helpful to actually look at how we could address that. And it's not depression, it's just his type of ADD. Yes. Then also, people with dyslexia are often very sensitive, which is why you get bullied as well. But this book, The Highly Sensitive Child, I found really, really good. And just, it's quite different from, I guess, when I was a kid, my father's attitude was just, you just get on with it. You just toughen up. But actually realising that this being a sensitive person actually just is the way you are. It's not about toughening up. It's actually about just respecting that and acknowledging that some people are very sensitive. So that was a really eye-opening book for me in lots of ways. And before we open questions to the floor, where can people buy your book? Where is it? So I've had it in a few bookshops in town, but I am selling it from my website. So dyslexiaoctopus.com, that's where I blog as well. And you can just buy it and I post it out to you. It's on Amazon, it's on all the internet providers as well. But it actually makes more sense just to get it from my website, because with postage the way it is from overseas and stuff. But I do have copies here tonight, and although Peter said we can't linger, I think we can linger a little bit of time if you want to buy a book.
You can linger if you have cash.
Or you can just do it as, I've got my bank number, and you can just do it an online banking thing as well. I do have some change if anybody has a lot of change.
Great.
And it's $25.
But I feel like I've certainly taken over the conversation, and I have not let my colleague ask very many questions. He had to kind of get in there too. But I do want to open it to the floor, unless Simon, do you have anything you want to
Just
ask?
the only one comment I'd say is I have another job and I advise government, and I guess it's that link between research and and impact. And what I like about the book is that it's full of references. I think there's about 80 odd references, but it's actually written in a really easy to read way. And,
I did want that. I wanted it to be accessible. Although I'm starting to do Instagram reels and looking at YouTube and things like that, because I nearly didn't bother writing the book, because I thought, what's the point in writing a book about dyslexia, because people don't read books if they've got dyslexia. But a lot of people have bought it if their child has dyslexia or as a teacher. And I've been really pleased to see the reviews. I got a great review from a dyslexia assessor in Wales, actually, and he asked me to do an online Zoom for the dyslexia assessors in England, and my sales in England have been fantastic. It's been really good. So people who are actually working in the field of dyslexia have found it really helpful, and this is the book he recommends to all the parents who come along to him when he does the assessments. So that's been great for me.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to offer an opportunity for people to ask questions or make comments or share their experience and thoughts. Yeah.
Would the early intervention, linguistic intervention be contributive to the children, like before 3?
Before 3.
Would it be?
Well, it's interesting, in my book I mentioned there's a lady at the university, actually, Professor Gillan, who believes so. She's done work in preschools, hasn't she?
Yes, she has.
And with a program that her talk, I went along to her talk, was about how you could cure dyslexia. That's what, and I was like, I'm not sure you can cure it because it is a neurological difference. But basically what she was saying is you could actually ameliorate a lot of the problems with dyslexia if in those preschool years people had that ear training for the phonological awareness. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Phonological awareness. Yeah.
So I really feel that's an area that should be investigated more, because it was just a computer program that they ran. They basically screened all the kids in the preschool, found out the ones who had, like Harry had this issue where he just had no idea what these letters sounded like, and then did this training with them, and it made a huge difference, didn't it? Do you want to say anything else about that research?
No, there's it is really interesting research, and I think particularly targeting that listening and some of the reading. It doesn't always address some of the other issues, but it's certainly a good start, and certainly potentially gives them a head start with the reading.
Yeah, and I did want to mention as well eye issues, because I had a friend who thought she was doing me a great favour. When my book came out, she wrote a blog post for me about saying how she had dyslexia, and then when I started chatting to her, I actually realised she didn't have dyslexia. What she had was a lazy eye. So it was really quite awkward, because she spent 40 odd years telling everybody that she had dyslexia, and she actually had a lazy eye, because dyslexia is not something that will be corrected by putting a pair of special glasses on. That's not dyslexia, that's an eye condition. And you can have dyslexia-like effects if you have a lazy eye. It might affect how you read because you're not able to track properly, but it's not dyslexia. There's lots of other conditions that can give you a similar issue with reading, but it is a neurological condition. Dyslexia is actually about a brain wiring difference. But having said that, one of the things I had to do with Harry, when going back to his reading, was he had a squint when he was a baby, and apparently you do need a lead eye to read. So tracking is, being able to start at the beginning of the page and get onto the next line. So he couldn't do that because he didn't have a lead eye. His eyes, although by the time he was 2.5, he would never have been able to tell him how to squint. And I'd taken him to the doctors, and she went, "Oh, that's all sorted, not a problem." Actually, what it meant was his eyes weren't working together, and he didn't have a lead eye. So he needed special glasses from Anstis optometrists to help him with that tracking, which did work. And also, apparently, you do need a lead ear as well. So that was what his speech therapist lady was doing. She was training him to have that lead ear. So it's really interesting, those little things that not everybody automatically gets. Yes, at the back.
Oh, just interesting that you're talking about their eyesight. So my stepdad wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia until he was in his probably 30s. he, like your brother, left school with no qualifications at all, believing he was totally stupid, couldn't read he couldn't start the beginning of a word and get to the end of the word and remember what the beginning of the word was. And when it was diagnosed, through the help of my mum, who's a teacher and is very, very good around teaching to the margins, whether that be gifted and talented or whether that be people with specific processing disorders, what they actually did, which was in the 90s, was they had these coloured lenses on glasses, which did seem to make quite a big difference. And I just wondered, is that still used?
Yeah, it's
And
interesting.
what is it doing?
Yeah, that's a thing called Erlen's,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit controversial. Some people say, oh, other people, like your stepdad, go, look, it transformed my life.
Yeah.
And for me, that actually, is it controversial? If it's working for somebody, it's working for them. So we did have Harry tested for Erlen's, and basically what that is, black print on white paper for some people is just very, very difficult. So you can print things out on different coloured papers, that's one way, or you can have glasses that actually have a tinted lens to them, and that works for some people as well. It's an actual different thing to dyslexia, it's Erlen's syndrome. So it's just for some people, I think it's to do with light and the frequency of light. It just means they can't read black print on white paper, so they do need to have special glasses. But yeah, Erlen's is definitely a thing, I think.
I'm just so surprised with Beth when she's saying it's almost like our grandson who's just turning 13 next week, and he just absolutely loves mountain biking. He's mentioning it to you. He loves his hiking, but the mountain biking, because as you say, it's quite expensive. And it was so interesting about the music. We never thought that he'd be able to, if he can't read, he just picked up the notes from the music. And there's such a lot of similarities, not all, but I can't believe there's so many similarities to what you said. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's another interesting one, just put that down there. One interesting one was that at 11 years of age, he said to me one day, Granddad, would you take me to Mitre 10? And I said, yeah, I'll take you to Mitre 10. What do you want to go there for? He said, I want to buy a compound mitre saw. You've got to be joking. Anyway, I said, well, they're very dangerous things. And, oh yes, no, I know that. He said, but could you take me along? So we went to Mitre 10, and I said to the man, this 11-year-old here wants to buy a compound mitre saw. Oh, I bet you haven't sold many of those to an 11-year-old. Anyway, he got this, and he's been amazing. He's built stuff off this. I mean, we went through all the safety features. I said, you know that you can lose fingers and arms and all sorts of things, but he's very good. But what he's made, and just last year, he made a whole table out of pallet wood, and I had nothing whatsoever to do with it at all. He worked out the design of it, he worked out the dimensions of it, and he built the whole thing and so on. And it's very interesting. I was going, a friend one day, and I was just going to see this friend, and going into the factory, there was a joinery factory at the front, and it had free wood. And I thought, oh, that'd be good, I could get him some free wood. So I went in and I said to the guy, he said, oh, it's just custom wood. I said, no, we don't want that. And then I told him why I wanted. I said, he's got an 11-year-old with a compound mitre saw. And I said, he's quite dyslexic. And he said, I would have him any day ahead of an ordinary person. He said, they think differently, and he said he might struggle with the maths side of it a little bit, but that's not, he said, I would take him ahead of anyone else if they came to a job.
Good on them. Great, that playing to their strengths is so important.
Yeah, and I've got an elderly friend whose son was very dyslexic, and he's had a terrible time in his early days. And at a school, they said, find them a passion, or let them find a passion, and then follow it the whole way.
Yeah.
And that's what we sort of done with woodworking. So, as I say,
great, that's great.
I saw it for 11-year-olds.
Yeah. Well, actually having a grandparent who can encourage that passion, because unfortunately you might just hit a woodwork teacher at school who, really puts them off it.
That's exactly the problem. He's going to high school next year, and he went to the introduction, and he spoke to the woodwork teacher, and he asked him, well, can I use this, can I use that? Teacher, oh, no, you
Yeah.
can't do that, you can't do that.
Safety.
And
Yeah, but no, this is where your job is invaluable, to actually encourage them and
we're just a bit worried
Doing
that,
that.
you know, he's going to go and do woodwork in high school, and it's going to discourage him if he
Yes.
doesn't, but we'll sort
No,
of get it.
Harry was the same. He actually got the prize for hard materials in primary school. He went to high school and hit this woodwork teacher who just crushed him. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important if you can keep
Yeah.
that going. Yeah. Yeah.
I think leading on from that, what I've taken from your talk the most is that in the tertiary sector, we need to think about different ways that we would actually deliver information. So you, in our chat beforehand, you said having lectures recorded is really helpful. But when I think about it, I think almost everything we do at university is just working the wrong way against the grain. The motor skills, the writing, the memory. And so that's really what I'm interested in, is alternate ways of delivering information. So for example, and amazingly, every year in Latin and Greek class, ancient Greek and Latin, we have dyslexic students. This is a class where it's taught, you've got to memorize things.
No.
And so you think, oh, the learning support plan comes in and I think, oh, this is just, it's horrible to know it's a fail from the start.
Why did they choose that subject?
Okay, so I can't ask that question, but in fact, maybe it's not a valid question. The question is, can we teach the subject in a different way? Because if it were all taught orally, for example, and if I spoke Latin, which I don't well, some people do, but, so in fact, I wonder whether a priest who can do the mass, who can speak Latin relatively easily, could teach Latin in a different way, so that the students would walk away with the same grade and the same knowledge at the end of the semester, but having learned it a different way. So I guess my question, which is kind of circuitous, is, are there different ways to teach, rather than following a passion, are there ways that we can teach some of this stuff to a higher level? Alternate ways of teaching so
I'm
that we get more
struggling.
success.
Yeah, I'm struggling with languages because I think it might be a self-awareness thing for these students. I actually didn't know I had dyslexia, and I did Latin, French, and German at O-level.
So, but you did it, and you
I
obviously.
scraped through. I actually used to listen to French radio all the time. I really, 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 really wanted to be good at French. But it was a huge issue for me with memory and being able to remember all those irregular verbs. And I actually have said to Harry, he's not going to bother with languages. My daughter is very good at Te Reo Māori, and yet for Harry, I've just said, let's deal with that later. You know, I think I'm not the world expert on this by any means, but I just know the struggle that I had with languages, and it is actually, apparently Spanish and Japanese are the easiest languages for people with dyslexia, but language, when you've got dyslexia, it's just a real challenge to learn other languages. And Latin is one of those languages that isn't a spoken language, so you just have to read it. I'm sorry, I haven't got wise words on that, but I would definitely encourage them to look at other subjects rather than
But the
languages.
Japanese and Spanish tip is actually a good one.
Right.
Would it make a difference incorporating a musical component to it, sort of putting things into song?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the way memory tips work, isn't it? You know,
Yes.
being able to have mnemonics, is it, and songs and all those things
Well,
are definitely
It's
helpful.
interesting, I'm learning Te Reo at the Wānanga, and they incorporate a lot of song, obviously, with
Right.
data. And every sort of sentence structure we're learning, they'll often put it into a song.
Yep.
And they incorporate, I forget what they call it, TPR or something, tactile physical response, that you're doing almost like signing with everything.
Right.
So there's a physical movement of everything.
Right. Have you had to do much written work for that course?
No,
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
they really focus on the oral,
Yeah.
and I think that's multicultural.
Yeah.
They in fact tell us to put our pens and our papers down,
Right.
because the rest of us all want to write it down.
Yes.
And they say just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Another, we can have one more?
Yeah.
One more?
What's the research on the relation between dyslexia and the self-control
Dyslexia between
and the self-control, self-regulation?
self-control. Well, about I've just got the stats here, I think. When you talk about self-control, often that's the ADHD component, and it's very, very high, the link between dyslexia, 40 or 50% between dyslexia and ADHD. So self-control in that respect, impulse control is a big feature with ADD and ADHD. They don't have good impulse control. So you will find that as quite common for people with dyslexia. Yeah.
And what about planning, Beth? You know, that planning organization.
Yes, I do believe, and we've
That's a big
we've
self-regulation.
had a chat about this
Yeah.
earlier, that I do think I am Harry's executive function and brain, basically. And this is what I'm trying to move him onto, being able to plan. I mean, we've got whiteboards, we've got charts, you have tick charts in the morning, you have pictures, you have all this kind of stuff to try and get them to be able to do it. But it certainly doesn't come naturally to him. And even the time, I haven't even touched upon that, but the complete inability to understand how long things take. It's quite funny. He loves op shopping, and there's op shops right across town, and he goes, "Oh, I just want to go to the op shop," and he thinks he can just get there and back, and in 10 minutes, and there's just no concept of how long things take. Yeah, time's really big one.
And that's symptomatic of dyslexia.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, the inability to understand time is a huge part.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Peter.
Probably one more.
We can have one more. Anybody else have a comment or question? Something they want to share?
I was just interested in one of your boxes.
Yeah, I've got them here.
The one on the floor.
Oh, one of
The
these
big
ones?
one, the
Yeah,
big one.
sorry, then I haven't
Oh,
written these
these.
ones.
No, the big one.
Those ones, yeah. So I have got some information there about all about spelling and all about reading resources. And they're very, very helpful you just go on the website and you can send them an email and chat with them. I'm not sure with COVID how long things are taking or whether there's any difficulties. You might just have to check that out. But there's a sort of test on the site that you can work out what the level would be, so that you can get the right level. But I've got a little code on the bit of paper there because I'm a big promoter of their work, because I actually don't think Harry would be reading and spelling if we hadn't done this. It made a huge difference to him. Yeah.
I'm going to sneak one more question.
There is just a vague comment, but also a question. At university recently, we've been told that the new structured literacy courses that they're bringing in with schooling, and I've been able to see it in schools. So I don't know if you've seen it or not, but
Yeah.
whether you think it works well for dyslexic children.
It's looking much better. Yeah, I've been hearing good things about this, and I'm so thrilled. Absolutely, it is. What works for a dyslexic child helps everybody. So I think this is the key, to actually get it right for your dyslexic children, which you will have in every single class, and everybody will benefit from it. So this is the idea of this program here. You just don't have any gaps. It's very structured, and you build on it. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
That's good to hear, actually.
It
That
is.
that's the move. I think in education we see those fluctuations between modern learning
Yeah.
environments, which we've had a discussion about, and the
Yeah.
challenges those bring
Yeah.
for many students.
Well, I was just chatting to someone who works at Kit McGrath, and she said their enrolments have gone through the roof since the modern learning environment came in.
Wow. Yeah. It's a very, very challenging. So sometimes it's good when we see the trend coming the way of in favor of our students and our children.
I guess with that, there's that literacy approach. There's still no mandate that schools have to use that approach, and universities don't have to teach their student teachers how to teach in that way. So it's so hit and miss whether schools really going to use it or not.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And
Yeah, there's quite a few schools in Christchurch that are picking it up now, but I'm not sure about the rest of the country.
Hopefully, when they get good results, it'll start to
Yes.
snowball. I'm really
yes,
hoping
that's
that happens.
that's the hope. But that's good and interesting point.
Well, that's probably where we want to leave it now.
Okay, so Beth, thank you. That was really enjoyable, and I think I got most of my questions in. I didn't leave Simon much time, but he can linger.